Okay, this is part two of chapter 6. So we have the Native Americans. So now that we're creating a government, how are we gonna deal with the people that are already here, the Native Americans? The answer is not that good. They were not granted citizenship, so they were not Americans, so they didn't have all the rights the Americans had. They were not considered, and they were not considered foreign nations as European countries were. If they were considered a foreign nation, we could at least trade with them or like do treaties with them and all that stuff. But they were not. There's going to be a problem later on. And there was no direct representation in government, so they were not even mentioned. This was a problem because we didn't know what to do with them. We saw them as just a burden. And we're going to see how that treatment led to their disenfranchisement throughout American history, how we did them wrong. We have U.S. neutrality. Washington urged neutrality in the war between France and Britain. So if you guys remember, this was the time when France was in its revolution, is having all these battles and Napoleonic wars. So like, how do we deal with these countries that are fighting? Do we get involved or do we not get involved? We have Citizen Genet. Citizen Genet was a French national who was here in the United States, kind of urging the Americans to go to war against Britain. So he was stirring up trouble. We have Jay's Treaty, which was a treaty with Britain, kind of saying we have a lot of trading with Britain, we have to interact in some way or another. So let's come up with a treaty that I know you're fighting and you're having all these problems, but we are a different country now. We need to come up with a treaty so that we can handle our business. The U.S. received compensation for damages ships. This upset the South because even though they said they were going to pay, they never did. Britain promised to leave the ports or the forts and kind of like let the South trade and continue to trade with other countries. So that was part of Jay's Treaty. We have Pinckney's Treaty, which was a treaty with Spain. The U.S. granted navigation rights to the Mississippi River and rights to the deposition in New Orleans. So us expanding south, we're getting more territories. We have the downfall of the Federalists. The election of 1796, after Washington came out of power, we have Adams become president. He was the second president, and Jefferson was his VP. The reason that even though they were going against each other, back in the day, if you didn't win, you became VP. So it wasn't like you choose your running mate. The guy that doesn't win becomes VP. We have Washington's farewell address. So after he serves 2 terms, Washington decides to kind of stop being president. Nobody tells him that he needs to stop, but he does it all by himself. He's as a president for all presidents, except for Roosevelt. We're going to learn about that later on. He warned against foreign alliances. He knows that all of this is going on in the world. We need to stop it. We have the XYZ affair, where three U.S. diplomats were sent to France to kind of like negotiate all these plans. We already had a plan with Britain, and France didn't like that. So U.S. sent 3 diplomats to kind of like smooth out the plan. The 3 French diplomats, XYZ, demanded a bribe, so they made things worse when we were trying to deal with the French. It caused a war hysteria and eventually led to the Quasi-War. The Quasi-War was basically undeclared naval war between the U.S. and France, and it was us trying to fight in this war, showing like us getting entangled in foreign affairs, just like Washington warned us against. It ended with the Napoleon reign after Napoleon came to power. For the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798, the purpose was to punish the opposition of the Federalist Party and the Adams administration for the handling of the Citizen Genet, XYZ, and the Quasi-War. We have the Alien Act, basically saying it increased residency requirements for foreigners to become citizens. We don't want another Citizen Genet kind of stirring up troubles in our country, so we're starting to make more restrictions. The president could deport foreigners, so it was when presidents could still deport foreigners, like Citizen Genet. We have the Sedition Act. It made it illegal to criticize the government. During this time, the Alien and Sedition Act, what the Quasi-War did is that it led to basically the government, exactly what the anti-federalists were upset about, and the Democratic Republicans. The government being too powerful. The Alien and Sedition Acts were proof that the government could take away your liberties during times of war. The 10 Republican newspapers' editors were convicted under the law, under the Sedition Act, which goes against the First Amendment, if you guys know. You have the Virginia and Kentucky Resolution. It was written by Jefferson and Madison. It urged states to nullify the Alien and Sedition Act. So basically saying, we do not approve of this act. It goes against the Bill of Rights. We don't want it out. It was more symbolic at the time. We have the Revolution of the 1800s. The reason that it's called the Revolution of 1800s, not because there was any fighting or any war, it was basically because there was a transfer of power. We went from a federalist government, because Adams was the second president after Washington, to a democratic republican. So the reason it's called the Revolution of 1800s is because we go from one government to the next. Jefferson and Burr tie for presidency. Jefferson eventually wins and Burr becomes vice president. Remember, back in the day, the person that loses becomes VP. Why is it called the Revolution? It was a peaceful transition of power between political parties. So it wasn't an actual fight, it was a transfer of power. We have the Judiciary Act of 1801, which was passed by the Federalist Congress while Adams was still president. It created many new federal judgeships and courts. And during this time, Adams was super pissed and bitter that he lost the election to Jefferson. So what he did is he did something petty. He appointed a bunch of last day offices, or appointed a bunch of judges that were Federalists that went against Jefferson's government. It was called the Midnight Judges, and a showdown was sure to come.